I never thought rebuilding a Bugatti Veyron would turn into something like this, something that actually made me question whether I could even finish the project at all. When I first got the idea, it felt simple in my head. Take one of the most legendary hypercars ever built, bring it back to life, and document the entire journey. The Bugatti Veyron is not just a car, it's a symbol of engineering madness, speed, and perfection. Every gear, every bolt, every line of that machine was designed with obsession. But what I didn't realize at the time was that working on something like this doesn't just involve tools and parts. It involves rules, systems, and sometimes things that are not even visible at first. At the beginning, everything was going smoothly. The teardown process, the inspection, planning the rebuild, it all felt like a dream project. I was excited every single day. Even the damaged parts felt like pieces of art I was restoring. But then something unexpected happened. It started with a simple delay, a permission issue. Nothing major at first. I thought it was just paperwork, the kind of thing that happens in big automotive projects. I waited. I followed up. I stayed patient. But the answers I was getting didn't make sense. Every time I tried to move forward, there was another barrier, another restriction, another reason I couldn't proceed. It wasn't direct rejection. It was something more complicated. Something that felt like a loop I couldn't escape. That's when I first heard the word that changed everything. Loophole. At first, I didn't even understand what it meant in this situation. I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding in documentation or regulations. But as I started digging deeper, I realized this wasn't just a small technical issue. There were rules around the vehicle's structure, its identity, and how much of it could legally be rebuilt or restored under certain classifications. And somehow, my project had fallen right into a gray area. Not fully allowed, not fully denied, just stuck. And that's the worst place to be in any project like this. Because when something is completely denied, at least you know where you stand. But when it's stuck in between, you keep trying different ways forward, thinking one of them will work. That's exactly what I did. I tried adjusting the rebuild plan. I tried reclassifying parts. I even explored alternative methods just to keep the project alive. Every step forward felt like progress, but every progress step led to another wall. And slowly, I started realizing something important. This wasn't just about rebuilding a car anymore. It was about navigating a system that wasn't designed for projects like this. The Bugatti Veyron is not an ordinary vehicle. It has a complex identity in automotive regulations. And when something is that rare, that expensive, and that historically important, even rebuilding it becomes a sensitive process. But still, I didn't want to give up. There were moments where I literally stood in the garage, looking at the chassis, thinking about everything we had already done. The progress, the effort, the time invested. Walking away at that point didn't feel right. But the loophole, it kept coming back. It wasn't something I could fix with tools. It wasn't something I could solve with money. It was structural, system-based. And that's when I understood why so many people never talk about this part of rebuilding exotic cars. Everyone sees the glamour, the engines, the speed, the design. But nobody talks about the invisible barriers, the legal side, the classification side, the approval systems that decide what can and cannot be done. And in my case, that system almost stopped everything. There were moments I genuinely thought the project was over before it even reached completion. Not because of damage, not because of missing parts, but because of something completely outside the garage. But instead of stopping, I decided to take a step back and fully understand what was actually going on. I spent time going through every detail carefully, every requirement, every limitation, every possible workaround that still kept everything legal and safe. And slowly, things started to make sense. The loophole wasn't just a problem, it was a misunderstanding of classification boundaries. Once I understood that, the path forward became clearer. Not easy, but possible. Still, even with clarity, it wasn't instant progress. There were more approvals needed, more confirmations, more waiting. But this time, I wasn't confused. I wasn't guessing. I knew exactly what needed to be done. And that changed everything. Because when you understand the system, even a loophole stops being a wall and starts becoming just another step in the process. Eventually, I was able to move forward again. Slowly, carefully, but forward. And standing there again in the garage, looking at the Veyron project continuing after everything that almost stopped it, it felt different. Not just like a rebuild anymore. It felt like overcoming something bigger than the car itself. This wasn't just about restoring a machine. It was about understanding that sometimes the biggest challenges aren't mechanical. They're procedural, invisible, quiet, but powerful enough to stop even the most ambitious projects. And if there's one thing I learned through all of this, it's that every stop isn't always final. Sometimes it's just a system asking you to understand it better. And once you do, even the biggest loophole can be worked through. The rebuild isn't just continuing now. It's stronger than it ever was before. And after that point, everything changed in how I approached the project. Before, I was rushing forward, trying to push through every obstacle. But now I started realizing something very important. In a project like this, speed doesn't matter as much as clarity. One wrong assumption can send you into weeks of delay. So I slowed down, not the project itself, but my thinking. Every document, every requirement, every step was now being checked properly. No guessing, no shortcuts. And slowly, the situation started becoming more stable than before. But even then, there were still moments where that loophole situation would appear again in different forms. Sometimes it wasn't the same issue, but a variation of it, a reminder that systems like this are layered. One solved problem often reveals another smaller one underneath it. At one point, I remember standing in the garage late at night. The lights were low, the car frame was sitting there quietly, and I was just thinking how something so beautiful mechanically can be held back by something completely invisible. No broken engine, no missing part, just rules and classifications. It made me respect the process in a different way, but at the same time, it was frustrating because you don't fix invisible walls with physical tools. Still, I didn't want this project to become another unfinished story. So I started reaching out, asking more precise questions, double-checking every detail, and slowly building a clear path through the confusion. And this time, something different happened. Instead of getting blocked immediately, I started getting conditional approvals. Small progress points. Not full freedom yet, but movement. And in a project like this, even small movement is a big win. Every small step felt like unlocking another piece of the puzzle. But the interesting part was, the deeper I went, the more I realized this wasn't unique to just my situation. A lot of high-level automotive projects face similar hidden barriers. People just don't talk about them publicly because from the outside, it looks like everything is either done or not done. Nobody sees the in-between struggle. And that in-between stage is exactly where most projects break. Not because they're impossible, but because they test patience more than skill. There were moments I honestly thought about stopping. Not because I couldn't continue physically, but because mentally it felt draining dealing with something I couldn't directly fix with effort alone. But then I looked at how far I had already come. The disassembly was done. The structure was understood. The rebuild plan was clear. And most importantly, the vision was still intact. Walking away at that stage didn't feel right. So I kept going. And slowly, things began to align again. The approvals that were stuck started moving. The confusion around classification started clearing. And that loophole that once felt like a dead end started becoming just another step in the process that needed patience instead of force. That's when I understood something deeper about projects like this. Sometimes the real challenge isn't building the car. It's surviving everything around the build. And when I finally started seeing progress again, it didn't feel like luck. It felt like understanding. Like I had finally learned how to move through a system instead of fighting against it blindly. The rebuild of the Bugatti Veyron wasn't just continuing anymore. It was evolving, not just as a machine, but as a journey. And every single delay, every restriction, every confusing moment that once felt like a stop, now feels like part of the story that made the final progress actually meaningful. Because without those obstacles, the rebuild would have just been another project. But because of them, it became something much bigger. A story about patience, systems, and understanding that sometimes the real barriers are not in front of you. They're in how you interpret what's in front of you. And once that changes, everything else starts moving again. And from that point onward, I stopped looking at it as a problem that needed to be beaten and started treating it like a process that needed to be understood. Because honestly, That's what it was the whole time. The Bugatti Veyron rebuild didn't suddenly become easy, but it became clear. And clarity changes everything. Every approval that came through after that didn't feel like luck anymore. It felt like progress earned through patience. The kind of progress you only get when you stop forcing things and start working with the system instead of against it. And slowly, the garage started feeling different again. Not like a place of frustration, but like a place of movement. Parts started coming together again. The rebuild timeline, which once felt completely stuck, started opening up in ways I didn't expect. And every time another piece was cleared, it reminded me of how close this project was to being fully alive again. But the most important change wasn't in the car. It was in my mindset. Because once you deal with something like this, something that has invisible barriers, you stop assuming that every problem is about effort alone. You start thinking differently, more carefully, more strategically. And that's when everything started making sense. That loophole wasn't really a trap. It was a test of understanding. A reminder that complex projects don't just exist in physical space. They exist in systems, rules, and structures that you have to respect if you want to move forward. And once I understood that fully, there was no more stopping the rebuild. Not because the rules disappeared, but because I finally learned how to move within them. Now, looking at the Bugatti Veyron project where it stands today, it doesn't feel like something that was almost stopped anymore. It feels like something that was temporarily paused, so it could be done correctly. And that's a big difference, because one version of the story is about failure, and the other version is about timing, patience, and understanding things at the right level. So when people ask me now what really happened, I don't say it was stopped. I say it was tested, and it passed. The rebuild continues now with more clarity, more structure, and more respect for the process than ever before. And if there's one thing this entire journey proved, it's that sometimes the biggest obstacles aren't there to end your work. They are there to make sure you understand it well enough to complete it properly. And this Bugatti Veyron isn't just being rebuilt anymore. It's being brought back the right way, step by step, without shortcuts, without confusion, and with a lesson that will stay with me far beyond this project. Because in the end, it was never just about rebuilding a car. It was about learning how to move through the system that controls it. And now that I understand that, there's nothing left that can truly stop it. The rebuild continues,